All right. All right. All right. We're talking. Oh, into the microphone. Hello, hello, hello. I we're doing a second stream, I guess. Um this time I need to set up my my little um where I'm going to take notes because we're going to start off this stream with a lecture that it's kind of expanding on the stuff that we got to at the end of the last stream. I'm going to be talking about history as a process of abstraction. Um, and then from there, we're going to move and try to read the rest of the chapter if we can. Um, all right. Okay. Okay, how do we want to start? Okay, let's start by reading the last couple of paragraphs that we read um the last couple of paragraphs that we read right before the end of the last stream. Um I'm going to start right here. The stake will always have been the murderous power of images, murderers of the real, murderers of their own model, as the Byzantine icons could be those of divine identity. To this murderous power is opposed that of representations, as a dialectical power, the visible and intelligible mediation of the real. All Western faith and good faith became engaged in this wager on representation. That a sign could refer to the depth of meaning, that a sign could be exchanged for meaning, and that something could guarantee this exchange. God, of course. But what if God himself can be simulated? That is to say, can be reduced to the signs that constitute faith. Then the whole system becomes weightless. It is no longer itself anything but a gigantic simulacrum, not unreal, but a simulacrum. That is to say, never exchanged for the real, but exchanged for itself, in an uninterrupted circuit without reference or circumference. Such is simulation, insofar as it is opposed to representation. Insofar as it is opposed to representation. Representation stems from the principle of equivalence of the sign and of the real. Even if this equivalence is utopian, it is a fundamental axiom. Simulation, on the contrary, stems from the utopia of the principle of equivalence, from the radical negation of the sign as value, from the sign as reversion and death sentence of every reference. Whereas representation attempts to absorb simulation by interpreting it as a false representation, simulation envelops the whole edifice of representation itself as a simulacrum. Such would be the successive phases of the image. It is the reflection of a profound reality, first stage. Second phase, it masks and denatures a profound reality. Third stage, it masks the absence of a profound reality. Fourth stage. It has no relation to reality, any reality whatsoever. It is its own pure simulacrum. In the first case, the image is a good appearance. Representation is of the sacramental order. In the second, it is an evil appearance. It is of the order of maleficence. In the third, it plays at being an appearance. It is of the order of sorcery. In the fourth, it is no longer of the order of appearances, but of simulation. The transition from... Oh, 1 second. I got an alarm that's going off on my phone. Okay. Oh, goodness. We're back. Okay. Um, the transition from signs that dissimulate something. Oh, the transition from signs that dissimulate something to signs that dissimulate that there is nothing marks a decisive turning point. The first reflects a theology of truth and secrecy, to which the notion of ideology still belongs. The second inaugurates the era of simulacra and of simulation, in which there is no longer a God to recognize his own, no longer a last judgment to separate the false from the true, the dead from its artificial resurrection, as everything is already dead and resurrected in advance. When the real is no longer what it was, nostalgia assumes its full meaning. Then there is a plethora of myths of origin and of signs of reality, a plethora of truth, of secondary objectivity and authenticity, escalation of the true, of lived experience, resurrection of the figurative where the object and substance has disappeared, panic-stricken production of the real and of the referential, parallel to and greater than the panic of material production. This is how simulation appears in the phase that concerns us, a strategy of the real, of the neo-real and the hyper-real, that everywhere is the double of a strategy of deterrence. Okay, so, now I'm gonna lecture for a little bit. Um, so, uh, okay, how do I control? No, alt. Okay. Um, Let me adjust the microphone while I do this. Okay, so um, I to think about what we're talking about here, I think it is very helpful to contextualize it within a broader historical process, like being able to think about history as a series of processes, instead of just as a series of kind of discrete events that have little to do with each other, is incredibly, incredibly important. And there's all sorts of narratives that you can construct, you know, but we're going to talk about just one today. That it actually intersects with a lot of other ones, but I'm going to talk about history as a process of abstraction. And that plays directly into this because the era of simulacra and simulation is the triumph of abstraction as abstractions of nothing, right? Okay, so okay, so let's think about the history of let's think about the history of homes, right? We're going to think about houses. We've got a little symbol here. We got a little home symbol. Now, so actually, we'll come back to the just to think for a moment the fact that we have a symbol here that represents the concept of home to us, that it's used in phones to mean a kind of home base. What does this have to do with this image? What does this image have to do with even before its image? So how do we get to the point that you see this little thing and this points to the phone screen, right? Like how like that, how do we get to that point? This is the question that we're going to ask. So let's consider the kind of progression of history, starting with pre-civilization, right? So pre-civilization, we have you have a tribe, right? I don't know how to drive this. Okay, so let's just we have a tribe, right? Okay, well how are we gonna set the stages up here? So in the tribe, you have kind of an immediate connection with the people around you and the world around you. You have your home is this whole intersection of different forces that play through you and around you and that you're interacting with. It's this kind of like immediate immersion in the world. And like there is and any sort of like signs and symbols are kind of a form of direct interaction with that world, right? Because everything that we're doing is already kind of leaving a like you're kind of in the midst of a thing that's bigger than you, and if you leave a mark on it, you're taking part in it, right? You put your hand on the cave wall, um, and but your home is is this kind of site of interaction with all these things. And then you move into I probably actually should have started. And whatever. We're my favorite thing in philosophy is when people do theories of all of history. So we're going to do the worst one ever. Um, so okay, and then you move into early civilization, right? And then suddenly things are centralized under a city state. And in the city state, so there's already been a process of abstraction. So you in this there is this kind of immediate co-penetration of nature and the human in tribal stage. And then civilization emerges when the human begins to think of itself in um, in kind of like dialogic, um, like it's like it's emerging from nature and defining itself against it, um, despite the fact that we come from it. And this is the thing that like Aristotle talks about. But um, and um, and if your home is no longer immersed in like this kind of immediate flow of things around you, your connection then like when if you and there's this process of so this is this thing that you're immediately immersed from, you separate it from you and it becomes an object to you, right? Becomes an object to you. And then once it is separated from you, um it becomes to it like this um it takes on representation in the form of like uh the deities of the city-state, right? Like, and then, of course there's tribal, there's like religion. Religion has always existed as part of human thing, but goodness, I had this planned out in my head. I should have written more of it down. But there's this process of abstraction where there's this split, it moves away from you. You can have representation of of um of it in the gods, right? And so you have like for example, a god over a city, right? And you um and the and another thing about this is that you have laws, right? And so whereas previously you were kind of governed by this thing that you're kind of immersed in, now suddenly you have done this process of this, you've abstracted from yourself like the process of this thing that you're immersed in nature has been this thing that you've taken and you've put names on how things should be, and you're holding it separate from you, right? These laws are things that you are making and influencing in kind of an immediate contact with, or at least it's someone is, right? And there's this kind of um, damn it, I should have. Where did I write the thing? Okay. And I went way too far back and for in history for this explanation. So let's move let's move forward to where stuff actually starts making sense for what I was trying to get at here. So and then feudal society. Wait, is it? No, it's definitely EU. Right? So in feudal society, you have you can the movement of divinity has severed itself entirely, right? And this form of abstraction is severed itself, and then like you have capital G God, right? As a kind of absolute, and this has its reflection in the figure of the absolute monarch. Which takes all of, right. So you have nature and you have laws, right? You have nature and you have laws, and you have nature, you have laws, you have divinity, right? And all of these ideas get subsumed into the idea of the law, and you create an absolute monarch, right? And so it's this process of stuff has become more abstract, and you've gotten to like deeper, penetrated deeper into the kind of ideal content of what you're actually talking about, right? The passage from laws to thinking about the law, like the what law in singular, and so the law in singular is the force of sovereignty, right? Right? Is the like core of the law. It's like it's like sovereignty, it's independence, it's the ability to legislate, it's power, right? Um and the need some water. And so you have um and in connection with this system, we have the image of of Hello, Vector Troll XD. I'm doing good. We have the image of the Lord and and the estate, right? Which is this is right, and so this is sovereignty. So now we're getting back to the home idea, right? And so in this, so sovereignty is immediately applied to sovereignty is immediately applied to the home, right? So that's where I planned this in my head, but then I did not write down the points of it well. Oh my god, I did not write down the points of it well. Wow, that's really what it switches between. Okay, I didn't write down the points of it well, so we're kind of winging it. And you have this immediate idea of sovereignty and connection with the land, right? Hello, oh, connection with the land, right? And so, okay, so if you notice, right? So as we moved from here, to here, and we've gotten more abstract, we have also increased in exploitation, right? So in between here, we have the advent of agriculture, of like widespread organized agriculture. And so if you notice that as we abstract, when we turning something into an idea is a form of mastery of it, right? It's a form of mastery of it. So putting something into an idea is leads directly to exploitation, right? Like mastery, science, knowledge, and power are coextensive with each other. Like they are immediately go together. And so they don't it doesn't necessarily entail exploitation, but the exploitation tends to come along with it, right? And so if you notice, we get abstract, and then this kind of immediately, we take nature has now become, you have this connection with the land, but oh my god, I keep hitting the thing. Okay, you have the connection with the land, but your connection with the land is one of exploitation, where it's being done in the name of a an abstract, the reason that you're doing stuff is abstracted to like this kind of chain of things that leads up to God, like the Lord, the monarch, God, and ultimately the law, right? But your home, and so now I went way too far back with this. Now we move from here, and now we get to like thinking about America, right? And okay, so we have this idea of 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 sovereignty, and the idea of the Lord and the land. And then we move. There's a very important move that happens here from you can also think about the Protestant Reformation, right? So there's this move from so the Um, 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 so there's this movement from from the singular source of authority um, to a kind of multiplicity of sources of authority. This is really, really critical. And um, this is, where the idea of democracy in the modern sense ends up eventually getting born from liberal democracy. But that's getting into the okay. How do I explain this? So okay, and so it's the movement from. So we're talking about. From the absolute monarch to the yeoman farmer, and so this is where America comes into this, right? Um, so America is one of the founding ideas of America is, as they're throwing off the yoke of the Europeans, is is basically this like kind of radical affirmation of the Protestant ideal, um, of everyone as um, having some sort of sovereignty on their own, right? And so this becomes immediately tied up near the beginning of the country. So of course this is founded on exploitation and violent appropriation of land and resources from the Native Americans, right? And of course on the backs of slaves and women and all sorts of other stuff. But there is this idea of the yeoman farmer is totally sovereign, right? So when you have your own, so you become an individual lord. When you have your own land, you have your own homestead, right? You've got a little home, right? I keep coming back to this symbol, and you've got your land, and you got um, you got a little. You got a horse, right? You got a little horse. You got a horse and a plow, right? You have a you have you have sovereignty over your own life, right? No one can tell you what to do because you can grow your own food. You have control of your own means of reproduction of the conditions of your life. That is to say, you can feed yourself, you can make stuff for yourself. Like, no, you can, you know, you make products that you can sell and trade. You don't have to work for anyone else. And not only that, you have this area of yours that you can do whatever you want with, right? So you previously there was people were subject to lords who expropriated the work that they did and told them how they could live, and they were subject to them in an ultimate sense, and they were interposed between them and God. But now you can have an immediate connection. You can have an immediate connection to God. You can have an immediate connection to um, um, to your living conditions, to the land. Um, and so this is becomes an incredibly important image in the creation of America, right? It's bound up with all sorts of stuff because this is what allows, theoretically, what allows the American system to run is that, you know, everyone, the reason that everyone can kind of be on this kind of voting playing field, and the reason that you have to have property to vote in the beginning, is the idea is that this is just kind of like a gentleman's agreement between people who don't really like, everyone can kind of take care of themselves, and this kind of allows them to come to the table and think about the common good, without, theoretically. Now, and this is home that's bound up with all these ideas of independence and hard work and immediate connection with God and with the land. But already, in order to get to this point, we had to separate from nature and turn it into an object to be exploited. We had to separate it from law and put it to something outside of ourselves that we can affect. Um, we have taken the idea of divinity and pushed it further and further away to the point that, like, now nothing can be interposed between us and it, right? Like, there's no authority between us and it, and um, and so there is this independence, and um, and this is what home means now in America, right? This is what home means, is that we have these independent homesteaders. And okay, and so then within the process of America, right? Then what this means, all these ideas that are wrapped up in homesteading get abstracted. They become like, there's kind of abstract mirrors of them that take that kind of proceed forth out of them and become, and there's this kind of mirroring that hides as things become worse in America, in terms of the triumph of capital. There's certain social progress that's being made, but there's the triumph of capital, and the closing of the frontier. This dream of everyone, and also like the people are becoming more and more interdependent because of the increasing further and further division of labor, and the amount of, not everyone can have the land, and capitalism and industrialism are marching forward. And so eventually this dream of the homestead is killed, of everyone as kind of independent homesteaders who have sovereignty and this kind of immediate connection with the world and immediate connection with God and nothing interposed between them. And then so we kind of abstract out from this, and then this is where we get America's obsession with small business owners and home ownership, because these are images of sovereignty that are meant to mask the fact that that we no longer have sovereignty, that the sovereignty that was seemingly there has been totally effaced, right? And so home ownership is an image of the homesteader. It's an image of the homestead where you have this area of yours where you have control over it. You can kind of decide it. It kind of gives you independence. It gives you this sense that no one can tell you what to do. But the thing is that it's like false, right? Like you aren't actually independent. You're subject to the government. You're subject to all the things that you have to buy are controlled by big companies. Like even if you have your own money, you're still totally dependent on the supply chain. And you can go live out in the wilderness, but where are you going to get all the stuff to go live out there? Where are you going to get it from? What are you going to go make it all yourself? What kind of life are you going to live like that? And even if even if you were to grant this, like, well, you could. First off, where are you going to get the land? But even so, like, how many people want to live like that, right? Home ownership, and this home ownership is kind of is proposed and given to a bunch of people to give them this sense of sovereignty, but it masks something that isn't there. It is an image that is a reflection of a reality that is missing, okay? Whereas the homestead is an image that is a reflection of the reality of freedom. Homeownership is a reflection of the reality of non-freedom. And small business owners are the same thing. It's the same thing, right? It's the idea of you don't have to work for another boss. No one can tell you what to do. And so this gives you a kind of amount of freedom, right? But once again, you're still subject to the supply chain, and there's still this kind of march of history that is making you irrelevant. And you're still subject to the government, right? And the freedom of trade isn't even really the same thing as being able to make your own stuff, to make your own food, make your own clothes. Making stuff that you have to sell and then buy that stuff is still far more interdependent than the thing that the homestead represents, which once again, even by the time we get to the homestead, we have already done all this kind of abstraction to create this idea of independence when in fact you're exploiting nature, right? And in reality in America you're exploiting slaves and Native Americans. and all this stuff. So we're so we've created this idea, and this idea has power over all these things, and then so now we have all this, and then um we have sitcoms where we have a reflection of a reflection, where we have, okay, well, now we have this place and this image of this thing, this kind of independent narrative, right? This independent narrative of people in a space that is theirs, that you get comfortable with, right? Um, um, Except we're already, so first off, a sitcom has nothing to do with um real life in the sense that like you're like living vicariously through them. But the thing is they're already living a false image of something that isn't really there. Um, and it's just like layers of falseness on falseness. But at this point, like there is this kind of pure power of just like the image of depicting something where like we have this image that is charged with all these stuff from the past that is no longer there, and then we create another layer of images which is charged um, even further, and then you can abstract further from this, and then you get like The Sims, right? Um, um, and now this is where it starts getting really interesting, right? Um, 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 so you and now we have this kind of split between um between how where does, and so now we're reflecting something that isn't even there, and so how do you reinvigorate a reflection of something that isn't, or that like a reflection of a reflection of a copy of a copy of a copy that just like has nothing, no content left in it. um uh you reinvigorate it in one of two ways, right? You either get just hyper specific with the details, and you just kind of you flood um you flood the imagination with just all these kind of numbers and representations, and a just kind of a precision of representation, like a pure, and this is what The Sims is, right? It's a representation of life. Of course there's this kind of, there's all these kind of tongue-in-cheek aspects of it, but it's like there's something very particularly fascinating in the kind of minuteness of the stupid details of like, the way that they go to the bathroom, and like the the fascination of kind of buying all the junk that you can buy in the game, right? And then or you go and you reconstruct a past, um right? And so um and so this is Stardew Valley is we have now taken like this image of the home, this idea of sovereignty is totally missing, and so now we are reconstructing it totally in retrospect in order to kind of attempt to re-inject some of the real back into our lives, right? But the thing is that it's a pale reflection that it's been purged of everything that was horrible and bad about the homestead, right? Everything that was horrible and bad about the homestead, but also everything that like the kind of true intensity of it and that true joy of freedom and place and sovereignty and like this kind of immediate connection with the world and with God is only like it can only be simulated, and it can only be simulated as like, you know, this thing that's multiple orders deep of, you know, technology and representation, and like we're trying to re-inject this thing back into it, but it's purged of everything dirty that would have made it actually real, right? But yet it still has this kind of fascinating, wonderful power because there's just something in this image of it that kind of goes straight into our psyche. And this, and so this is how we get to where we are now. So now to make a division, to sum up, and this is how you can think about it. Even though that connection is a bit dubious, um, you know, because we already talked about all the reasons. The homestead, it's kind of not really it, but imperfect, but it gets at the idea. um, once Here's my notepad. Um, Now, do I want to talk about money at all? Do I want to do that? Oh my god, it's 10:45. Wait a minute. How long have I been streaming? Oh, goodness. Okay, well, let's just read this. Let's just read. Ramses, or the rosy-colored resurrection. Ethnology brushed up against its paradoxical death in 1971, the day when the Philippine government decided to return the few dozen Tassidae who had just been discovered in the depths of the jungle, where they had lived for 8 centuries without any contact with the rest of the species, to their primitive state, out of the reach of colonizers, tourists, and ethnologists. This at the suggestion of the anthropologists themselves, who are seeing the indigenous people disintegrate immediately upon contact, like mummies in the open air. In order for ethnology to live, its object must die. By dying, the object takes its revenge for being discovered, and with its death defies the science that wants to grasp it. Doesn't all science live on this paradoxical slope to which it is doomed by the evanescence of its object in its very apprehension, and by the pitiless reversal that the dead object exerts on it? Like Orpheus, it always turns around too soon, and, like Eurydice, the object falls back into Hades. It is against this hell of the paradox that the ethnologists wish to protect themselves by cordoning off the Tassidae with virgin forests. No one can touch them anymore. As in a mine, the vein is closed down. Science loses precious capital there, but the object will be safe, lost to science, but intact in its virginity. It is not a question of sacrifice. Science never sacrifices itself. It is always murderous, but of the simulated sacrifice of its object in order to save its reality principle. The Tassidae, frozen in their natural element, will provide a perfect alibi, an eternal guarantee. Here begins an anti-ethnology that will never end, into which Wallen, Castaneda, and Clastres are various witnesses. In any case, the logical evolution of a science is to distance itself increasingly from its object until it dispenses with it entirely. Its autonomy is only rendered even more fantastic. It attains its pure form. The Indian thus returned to the ghetto, in the glass coffin of the virgin forest, again becomes the model of simulation, and of all the possible Indians from before ethnology. This model thus grants itself the luxury to incarnate itself beyond itself. In the brute reality of these Indians, it is entirely reinvented. Savages who are indebted to ethnology for still being savages. What a turn of events! What a triumph for this science that seemed dedicated to their destruction! Of course, these savages are posthumous, frozen, cryogenized, sterilized, protected to death. They have become referential simulacra, and science itself has become pure simulation. The same holds true at Crusat, at the level of the open museum, where one museumified in situ as historical witnesses of their period, entire working class neighborhoods, living metallurgic zones, an entire culture, men, women, and children included, gestures, languages, customs fossilized alive as in a snapshot. The museum, instead of being circumscribed as a geometric site, is everywhere now, like a dimension of life. Thus, ethnology, rather than circumscribing itself as an objective science, will today, liberated from its object, be applied to all living things and make itself invisible, like an omnipresent fourth dimension, that of the simulacrum. We are all Tassidaes, Indians who have become what they were, simulacral Indians who at last proclaim the universal truth of ethnology. We have all become living specimens in the spectral light of ethnology, or of anti-ethnology, which is nothing but the pure form of the triumphal ethnology, under the sign of dead differences and of the resurrection of differences. It is thus very naive to look for ethnology in the savages or in some third world. It is here, everywhere, in the metropolises, in the white community, in a world completely catalogued and analyzed, then artificially resurrected under the auspices of the real. in a world of simulation, of the hallucination of truth, of the blackmail of the real, of the murder of every symbolic form and of its hysterical, historical retrospection, a murder of which the savages, noblesse oblige, were the first victims, but that for a long time has extended to all Western societies. But in the same breath, ethnology grants us its only and final lesson, the secret that kills it, and which the savages knew better than it did, the vengeance of the dead. The confinement of the scientific object is equal to the confinement of the dead and the mad. And just as all of society is irredeemably contaminated by this mirror of madness that it has held up to itself, science can't help but die contaminated by the death of this object that is its inverse mirror. It is science that masters the objects, but it is the objects that invest it with depth, according to an unconscious reversion, which only gives a dead and circular response to a dead and circular interrogation. Nothing changes when society breaks the mirror of madness, abolishes the asylums, gives speech back to the insane, etc., nor when science seems to break the mirror of its objectivity. Where I put the pen. Ah, um, Nothing changes when society breaks the mirror of madness, abolishes the asylums, gives speech back to the insane, etc., nor when science seems to break the mirror of its objectivity, effacing itself before its object, as in Castaneda, etc., and to bend down before the differences. The form produced by confinement is followed by an innumerable, diffracted, slowed down mechanism. As ethnology collapses in its classical institution, it survives in an anti-ethnology whose task it is to re-inject the difference fiction, the savage fiction everywhere, to conceal that it is this world, ours, which has again become savage in its way. That is to say, which is devastated by difference and by death. In the same way, with the pretext of saving the original, one forbade visitors to enter the Lascaux caves, but an exact replica was constructed 500 meters from it, so that everyone could see them. One glances through a peephole at the authentic cave, and then one visits the reconstituted whole. It is possible that the memory of the original grottos is itself stamped in the minds of future generations. But from now on, there is no longer any difference. The duplication suffices to render both artificial. In the same way that science and technology were recently mobilized to save the mummy of Ramses II after it was left to rot for several dozen years in the depths of a museum. The West is seized with panic at the thought of not being able to save what the symbolic order had been able to conserve for 40 centuries, but out of sight and far from the light of day. Ramses does not signify anything for us. Only the mummy is capable of an inestimable worth, because it is what guarantees that accumulation has meaning. Our entire linear and accumulative culture collapses if we cannot stockpile the past in plain view. To this end, the pharaohs must be brought out of their tomb, and the mummies out of their silence. To this end, they must be exhumed and given military honors. They are prey to both science and worms. Only absolute secrecy assured them this millennial power, the mastery over putrefaction that signified the mastery of the complete cycle of exchanges with death. We only know how to place our science in service of repairing the mummy, that is to say, restoring a visible order, whereas embalming was a mythical effort that strove to immortalize a hidden vision. We require a visible past, a visible continuum, a visible myth of origin, which reassures us about our end, because, finally, we have never believed in them. Whence this historic scene of the reception of the mummy at the Orly airport? Why? Because Ramses was a great despotic and military figure? Certainly, but mostly because our cultural dreams behind this defunct power that it tries to annex, of an order that would have had nothing to do with it, and it dreams of it because it exterminated it by exhuming it as its own past. We are fascinated by Ramses as Renaissance Christians were by the American Indians, those human beings who had never known the word of Christ. Thus, at the beginning of colonization, there was a moment of stupor and bewilderment before the very possibility of escaping the universal law of the gospel. There were two possible responses: either admit that this law was not universal, or exterminate the Indians to efface the evidence. In general, one contented oneself with converting them, or even simply discovering them, which would suffice to slowly exterminate them. Thus, it would have been enough to exhume Ramses to ensure his extermination by museumification, because mummies don't rot from worms. They die from being transplanted from a slow order of the symbolic, mastery over putrefaction and death, to an order of history, science, and museums. Our order, which no longer masters anything, which only knows how to condemn what preceded it to decay and death and subsequently to try and revive it with science. Irreparable violence toward all secrets, the violence of a civilization without secrets, hatred of a whole civilization for its own foundation. Injustice with ethnology, which plays at extricating itself from its object to better secure itself in its pure form. Demuseification is nothing but another spiral in artificiality. Witness the cloister of San Michel de Cuxa, which one will repatriate at great cost from the cloisters in New York to reinstall it in its original site. And everyone is supposed to applaud this restitution, as they did the experimental campaign to take back the sidewalks at Champs-Élysées. Well, if the exportation of the cornices were in effect an arbitrary act, the cloisters in New York are an artificial mosaic of all cultures, following a logic of the capitalist centralization of value. Their reimportation to the original site is even more artificial. It is a total simulacrum that links up with reality through a complete circumvolution. The cloister should have stayed in New York in its simulated environment, which at least fooled no one. Repatriating it is nothing but a supplementary subterfuge, acting as if nothing had happened and indulging in retrospective hallucination. In the same way, Americans flatter themselves for having brought the population of Indians back to pre-conquest levels. One effaces everything and starts over. They even flatter themselves for doing better, for exceeding the original number. This is presented as proof of the superiority of civilization. It will produce more Indians than they themselves were able to do. With sinister derision, this overproduction is again a means of destroying them, for Indian culture, like all tribal culture, rests on the limitation of the group and the refusal of any unlimited increase, as can be seen in Ishi's case. In this way, their demographic promotion is just another step towards symbolic extermination. Everywhere we live in a universe strangely similar to the original, things are doubled by their own scenario, but this doubling does not signify, as it did traditionally, the imminence of their death. They are already purged of their death, and better than when they were alive. More cheerful, more authentic in the light of their model, like the faces in funeral homes. All right. Okay, that's that section. Man, it's really annoying when it does that. I need to use the restroom, and I'll be right back. All right. Okay. I'm gonna say a little bit about money and representation, which is a kind of continuation of what I was talking about last night. And then that'll probably be the close for today. Okay. How do I want to talk about this? Do I have the energy to explain this tonight? I started later than I intended to. Kind of tired. Oh, my thoughts are too scattered. Okay, I can't explain it. That's enough for tonight. Oh, I hate to end that way. That's fine. Okie dokie. Good night.